10 years ago. And this is something that everybody has to remember who wants to build a successful service out of that. You even see sites, you even see services and products like Flock. Flock, how many of you know use Flock? Flock is basically a browser which also shows you what people in your network are browsing, right? And what they would like you to see, what they're browsing, right? So if your friends are checking particular websites and things are good, they can actually make recommendations to you inside the browser, right? So that's a new way and a new method of exploring the web, of surfing the internet, because your social network, all the people around you are already doing it with you. Right? And the same I've shown you for music, for video, for photos, for everything basically, for any sort of content we are consuming now. There is a new social consumption layer which got added basically out of nowhere. Right? It wasn't there 10 or 15 years ago. What's more, you also see sites which some people like and some people dislike. But like Twitter, I don't know how many of you know what Twitter is, but basically Twitter allows you. It's a so-called microblogging site, right? Where you can actually, it's a social network where you have people who would subscribe to your updates, and then they would send an update. But an update can only be limited to 150 symbols, right? And people in your network can actually receive that update through their mobile phone. So when you say, I'm drinking coffee, you can send it through a mobile phone as well, and everybody in your network would get that message, right? Okay, they know that he's drinking coffee, right? So, and that, again, you may say that this is stupid and this is silly and this is totally, bizarre and nobody really needs it. But what it creates an entirely new way of us interacting with people in our network, and I really advise you to go and have a look at this article we just got out in Wired a couple of weeks ago, actually, 10 days ago, right? Where basically they're arguing that services like Twitter actually create a whole new social sixth sense, so to say, right? They're completely changing the way we interact with our community, and they're completely changing the way in which we talk to our friends, because now there is much more shared in common, right? It's a completely different ways of, completely different new way of social interaction, and I don't know if you can read it, but basically says that sites like Twitter give a group of people a sense of itself, making possible weird, fascinating feats of coordination, right? Once you put people together, right, and they have a platform and they have an anchor around which they can interact, right, you have no idea what sort of projects, ideas, or collaboration are going to come out of that, right? And even the creators of Twitter have no idea how people using Twitter might actually collaborate to do something else in real life, right? So the question here is, you create this service, right? You create a social network around it, and then the question is, and what do you do with this network? Or how do you try to sort of embrace it for positive change? And that's the bigger question, I'm trying to address in this presentation. Once you create a community around something, what do you do next, right? Or how do you use it for a purpose? Can you use it for a purpose? So this is a crucial question that you have to remember, and that would explain why you're seeing all those sites, right? Again, the last word on Twitter is that, I think that's a very nice description of the actual social phenomenon that's happening, right? And there is a scholar, Riza Reichelt, who is basically studying social networks, and she's studying microblogging a lot, right? And her definition of all those activities is something she calls ambient intimacy, right? Again, and she defines it as, the ability to keep in touch with people with a level of regularity and intimacy that you wouldn't usually have access to, because time and space conspire to make it impossible, right? And again, we can argue probably for the whole day on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that people are saying what they had for lunch, right? What they had for dinner, right? The key here is that people are interacting in new ways, and and those interactions are probably going to play a much more significant role once more and more services like that appear. Right? And then it should be essential for any, in my opinion, for any news organization to understand how you're going to change, A, your news delivery sort of mechanism, right? Or B, how you're going to actually, reach those people if the only thing they do is communicate with each other on Twitter, right? Those are all the questions which need to be addressed somehow and by somebody, right? And hopefully there will be. Again, so my bigger point here is that all those new social dimensions change the group dynamic completely, and I wouldn't make an effort even to give an impression that I understand how exactly those group dynamics are changing, right? And frankly, I don't think we would have anybody now who would be able to explain how exactly those group dynamics function. And it's not because it's and it's not because it's difficult. It's just that we don't have the mental capacity to process that. If you've been thinking about everything only in terms of economics, and I'm going to show you a slide about that afterwards. The economy think very rationally. You do something, you get a reward, right? And so the more you do, the more rewards you get. You're very rational. You do things for sort of rational motivation, right? And that just doesn't apply to the social web in 90% of cases, right? Because people are driven often by irrational, often by personal, often by other motives, which none of us can systemically aggregate in a body of knowledge, which can justify actually why they're doing something at a particular time. And we're going to very briefly look at Wikipedia later, and that would just explain the whole concept of what I'm trying to say here. Reflection is also getting social, right? It's not that it's not that, well, in the past, the way you reflected, the way people reflected was you sit down, you write something in your diary, right? You store the diary in your drawer, and then 50 years later somebody discovers it, and if it's good, they are going to publish it. Right? That's sort of your reflection process. Right? Now the whole thing is different. You actually reflect in public, right? And you actually get feedback from that. And if your reflections are good enough, is actually being taken from your blog and being put somewhere, be that a wiki, be that some sort of online Wikipedia, or be that, a news service, but, you are sort of contributing to a much wider conversation to which you never contributed when you were just writing things in your diary, or when you were just thinking about stuff in your head, right? Even if you didn't have a diary, right? And if you were just thinking sort of here in your brain, right? Now you have a platform in which you release all that stuff. And it's not that just you release that stuff, it's also you're forced to think in terms of word output. For those of you who blog would understand probably what I mean by that. Once you start blogging, your mental operation is, well, can I put it on my blog? How can I wrap it up in 200 words or one paragraph in order to make it publishable? And especially for those who blog on a regular basis. And that just changes the way in which our mental capacities operate, right? So the bigger point here is that if you really want to build a comprehensive system, which would show you why things are happening in the space, you have not only look at economics, you have to look at psychology, neuroscience, game theory, biology, and many other fields, which I don't think people right now have the capacity to, right? So again, that's just something to keep in mind. On a sort of economical level, what's been emerging as a completely new sort of type of economy, right? And if again, that's a very nice slide which shows you an overview of how human society has been evolving, around the practice of sharing mostly, right? So we started with the primary economy, basically where we were exchanging gifts, right? Because there was no money, where, it was very, very basic stuff, right? Hunter-gatherers, basically, right? Then we moved on to the secondary economy, where we had a king and a kingdom, and they were paying levies and taxes and contributions, blah, blah,